I'm going to start this talk off on a cheerful note by looking at all the things that could kill us. As far as we know, nobody in human history has ever been killed by a meteorite. But despite that, the chances that you, would get killed by a meteorite impact is surprisingly high. Because though the probability of it hitting us is very low, if it does hit us, it's going to do a lot of damage. This is another risk like that, nuclear war. It's no longer so fashionable as it once was, but people have been looking and trying to estimate what the probability of an accidental or deliberate nuclear war could be. And they've come up with numbers that go as high as about 1% a year. Now, 1% a year basically means that for you and me, or for most of us, our chances of dying of a nuclear war are much higher than our chances of being murdered, of being involved in a car crash, or of dying from cancer combined. But of course, it's much worse than that, because nuclear wars and asteroid impacts can not just kill the present, but they can destroy the future. They can eradicate not just us, but all the generations to come, all the things they could have built, and just leave a grayness forever where there could have been humanity. These are examples of existential risks. Risks plausibly likely to annihilate Earth-based intelligent life, that's us, or permanently curtail its potential. Risks can be generally put on two scales: scope, which is basically how many people are affected, and intensity, how bad it goes. High scope and high intensity, we get the so-called global catastrophic risks, and maximum scope and intensity, we get the existential risks. So, examples here. Well, I have a report coming out soon, hopefully, that looks at 12 global catastrophic risks, which I've arranged here and somewhat subjectively on an increasing uncertainty scale. At one end, we have asteroid impacts that we understand very well. And at the other end, we have things like artificial intelligence that we understand almost not at all. The thing about these these global catastrophic risks, is that most of them are critically understudied. Especially ecological catastrophes, nanotech, synthetic biology, bad governments, and AI, I feel, are massively understudied compared with the risks that they pose. But the risks that they pose are not all equal. Asteroid impacts could be deadly, but we actually figured out that the probability is very low. The top 4 risks at the moment are these ones: global pandemics, nuclear war, synthetic biology, and AI. We've seen nuclear war. This graph with very small fonts explains the risks of pandemic. These are the events that have killed more than 10 million people in human history. The numbers are somewhat approximate. We have a bunch of wars, we have some bad governments, some famines, but towering above all that, the biggest killer in human history, bar nothing, is pandemics and diseases. And actually, it's even worse than this, because even in war and famines, you'll get a lot of people dying from diseases as well. If you plot the fatalities from pandemics, you get what's called a power law with a frightening slope. Basically, this just means that the extreme events are much more devastating than the small events. And most power laws kind of break down as you go to the highest events, and it becomes much milder. With diseases, it goes the other way. It gets a lot worse. This, by the way, is why the WHO always overreacts to pandemics. It's because the average death per pandemic is reasonable or is low. But the maximum amount of deaths for pandemics, for some of the flu pandemics, is huge. Now we can touch on synthetic biology. Now this is a complicated area with great uncertainties, and to glibly and massively oversimplify, you could see it as pandemic risk plus human control. Finally, onto AI, the least understood of the big risks. And it's been least understood for a long time. We are terrible at predictions on it. This is a prediction from the original Dartmouth conference that coined the term, and they were basically predicting an AI by 57. 9 years later, Dreyfus, in an otherwise excellent publication, was predicting the end of computerized intelligence. I think it's safe to say that neither of these predictions have been entirely accurate. But maybe other predictions have done better. AI will be developed in 15 to 25 years. Care to guess who predicted that? Well, many people have predicted that. They predicted it in 2012. Also, 2011, 2010, 2009, and all the way back to 1960. This is, as we technically call it, not very good. In fact, we plotted expert and non-expert predictions in AI, the date they were made and the date by which they predicted we would have some form of human-like AI. This is Turing's original prediction, and over here is the AI winter, where no one was admitting that they were working on AI anymore. And the thing is, the difference between those bars is 50 years. These predictions are spread out, they're all over the place. There's no particularly strong pattern, and there's no real difference between experts and non-experts. I see no sign in here that anyone is honing in on some hidden wisdom, which is what we'd expect, because predicting AI is really, really hard. How would you do it? If you want to train expertise, you need good feedback, but no one's ever built an AI. We don't even know what it would look like. We don't really know what the steps along the way would be. So the fact that predictions are so bad is pretty much what we expect. But that's predictions. What's the risk of AI? Are we sort of thinking clanking robots with Austrian accents? No. As can easily be seen on this slide, the bigger and stronger animal is not necessarily the dominant one. It's the intelligence in artificial intelligence that is the problem. Here I've put the brain of a chimp and the brain of a human. They're not all that different, and yet chimps have a population of 200,000 and use basic wooden tools, whereas we have heavy industry, we're spread across the whole planet, and we have nuclear weapons. Since we extended our intelligence with computers, we've done a few other things, like walking on the moon, getting hydrogen weapons, and unprecedented economic growth. So the question is, how powerful could an AI that was the next step on this graph become? In fact, we don't even need to think about a super intelligent AI. We could think about what we could do with just human-level intelligence AI. If you have that, you could copy it. And you could train each copy in a separate area of human expertise, sciences and social areas. And then you could network them together, and you could get the AI equivalent of Edison, Einstein, George Soros, Bill Clinton, Oprah, Plato, Goebbels, Steve Jobs, and Bernie Madoff, network them together with huge databases, and run this super committee at thousands of times faster than human speed. This is the kind of being that you could produce just with human-level AI. And for that kind of being, it seems likely that the internet and the human race are just useful tools for achieving its goals. Achieving its goals, that's the tricky bit. What would these goals be? Well, these goals would presumably be what we programmed directly or indirectly into it. And we'd like to sort of set flags like this. Problem, if you do that, you're going to get that. In fact, as many people who've taken a philosophy course realize, even much simpler concepts like a chair are extremely hard to define. You can go around for hours arguing as to what is or isn't a chair. However, it's somewhat more critical to get the definition of humanity correct in a potentially extremely powerful AI than it is to finally sort out what a chair is. These are some goals that could go disastrously wrong. Suppose you had coded this into the AI somehow. Suffering and human are both very complicated concepts, but suppose you got them into your code somehow. Congratulations. You have just This is the single most effective way of preventing all human suffering. And the AI will fight you if you try and stop it from killing us all, because any other outcome has more human suffering. But maybe we can do a bit more clever, like keep humans safe and happy. Are you starting to see where this is going? Yes. It's very hard to program a goal that is safe for an AI. Some people have suggested some indirect approaches. Now, these approaches are not necessarily wrong. They might work, but I fear that unless they're exquisitely well programmed, the future of the world and probably the universe is going to look a lot like this. So I could say, uncontrollable and highly dangerous, this is what high-intelligence AIs are going to be. Except remember what I said about all the uncertainties. We have to add a lot of caveat words. Still, uncertainty works in both directions. We can't say that the AIs will automatically be safe, and the risk is far too high for my liking. You can see more of this argument in my boss's book, Superintelligence, in my pamphlet, Smarter Than Us. And what I can say without the slightest caveat is that currently, not enough work is being done to solve this problem. Now, this was sort of the disastrous AI outcome. But pretty much if it's not disastrous, it's probably going to be fantastic. Because all the intelligence and power that we were assuming for negative goals is now redirected towards positive goals. And for instance, the AI would probably protect us from all other existential risks. But this is for high intelligence AIs. As you move down on the intelligence scales, the outcomes become less extreme on the positive and negative scale and come to resemble the sort of good to bad outlooks that we're used to looking at. I propose for the rest of this talk to have a look at this area of the outcome, the really quite good but not superlatively good area. This could come from a moderately intelligent AI that was well programmed, but more interestingly, it can come from lots of other developments. I'm putting up a few here that would be relevant to it. General technology improvements, surveillance and surveillance, which is pretty much everyone watching the powerful. There's a whole talk there to give at some point. Bigger data and automation, so narrow AI, continuing automation of abilities. These could lead to us in some interesting directions. You can approximately lump some problems into political problems and some into manufacturing problems. Manufacturing problems are ones where if you build enough stuff, the problem goes away. Political problems are the ones where you need to get agreement between different groups in order to solve the problem. Now, it's not necessarily easier to solve manufacturing problems than political problems, but it's a lot easier to predict when they might get solved. And at least with most manufacturing problems, you're pretty confident they will eventually get solved. What's quite interesting is that there are a lot of technologies that actually move a political problem into a manufacturing problem. My sort of example is if someone came up with a very cheap solar panel, this would solve the intractable political problem of doing something about global warming, because no one would want to burn fossil fuels if it wasn't profitable to do it. So sometimes you can move problems like that. So what kind of manufacturing problems can I imagine that we might solve? Well, here are some which I think are arguably already solved. We can grow hydroponic foods. We can distill water from seawater, and we can get energy from solar panels. More interestingly, we can do all this at about the same cost as our current economy spends on energy and agriculture. So I'm saying that either now or very soon, the manufacturing problem of having enough energy, water, and food is solved. The political problem of ensuring a fair distribution of these resources is very much not solved. But that's a very different problem. What other problems might get solved if you consider them from the manufacturing perspective? Well, Absolute poverty is a candidate. We're making quite a lot of progress on this. And things like mobile phones, for instance, have brought a certain amount of infrastructure to poor countries. Further technological developments might allow other sorts of easy infrastructure, cheap, that can be deployed in this. So absolute poverty may go or might be dramatically reduced through innovations that we'll have soon. Relative poverty is a completely different issue. What I call blue-collar crime, which is basically a crime where if you see it, it's obvious that a crime's going on. If someone punches an old lady, it's obvious it's a crime. This is going to get attacked by surveillance, which is coming very strongly. The prices of cameras are getting cheaper and cheaper, and people are just streaming vast amounts of their data online. War, maybe. You could consider this the blue-collar crime between states. One of the reasons that countries have such big armies and on the position to go to war is that they don't know if their opponent is maybe assembling a large army. They don't trust their opponent. And with general surveillance technology, you can check that your opponent's not doing up to something. You can actually pass arms control regulations that are enforced without needing inspections. This will continue the decade-by-decade trend of reducing per capita violence in general. Now, this one I just threw in as an idea, mental illness. What am I thinking of? Well, suppose you had a Siri on your phone that could do cognitive behavior therapy with you. This would make a big dent in mental illness. In fact, in general, if you can move your treatment of disease from medicines to technology, your prices will go down much faster and your treatments will improve considerably faster. Poor eyesight is something that was pretty much solved by the invention of glasses. What else? Well, is death a manufacturing problem? Now, this is a bit hard to think about because death is so overlaid with philosophical and religious connotations in our culture, but there are quite a lot of people that are arguing that death is a manufacturing problem and one that could be solved. And I'm not convinced that they're wrong yet. Their arguments seem somewhat plausible. They could go wrong a lot, but it's at least something to bear in mind. So, okay, these are some of the minor problems that might get solved in the future. And as for the rest, well, I think we can let the next generation sort them out. Thank you.